Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. We are up to the laws of Keilim, chapter 15. It's Thursday. Let's start with a quick look at where we are up to in the Rambam. We are learning the Mishnah Torah, and we are, believe it or not, still in volume 10, the book of Torah. Which is the largest of all of the Rambam, with a total of 144 chapters. We are nearing the end of these 144 chapters. 8 subjects: Tumas Meis, Paraduma, Tsora'as, Mishka V'Moishav, Shar Aves HaTumas, other forms of impurity, foods, and now we are learning about vessels. We are about halfway through. There are 28 chapters on vessels. We are in chapter 15. Here's a little breakdown that has been made of what is discussed in these 28 chapters. We started by giving some principles about which vessels are susceptible. We spoke about wood, leather, metal, and then now we're learning about earthenware. And more specifically, today we're going to learn about cooking utensils, an oven, a stove. Now, if an oven was built into the ground or into the wall, then it would become part of the building and it wouldn't be susceptible to impurity. But if it's not built in, but it's just sitting on the ground, so there's a special verse of the Torah that teaches us that it still is susceptible to impurity, even if it's stationary and it's not made to be moved. And we're going to be looking at ovens and ranges today. Here we go. Once again, intention will play a role. An earthenware container does not become susceptible to initial impurity until the tasks necessary to finish it are complete. So until it's done, it's not yet susceptible to impurity. When are the tasks necessary to finish it completed? In other words, what is the final step in the making of an oven? When they are fired in a kiln, that's the last step. Now, how hot does it need to be? An oven needs to be heated enough to be able to bake donuts. To bake donuts, you don't need such a strong flame. If it's already been heated enough that it's now able to bake donuts without experiencing some cracks, then it is now complete and susceptible. A range, a stovetop with 2 openings, when it is heated so that a stirred egg can be baked over it in a frying pan. It's not very hot at all. A range with 1 opening. So now, if it's got 2 openings, it's already made for. So basically, just imagine you have this. Quickly go to the screen. So if you have a box, haven't done this in a while. Here you have a box. Hey, where's my box? Let's try it. Let's go ahead. Oh, it's white. Here we have a box. Okay. Just go like that. And then put another 2 lines in over here. Okay. So here we have our box. This is our oven over here. So if this box has 2 holes on top, it's got 1 hole over here and a second hole over here, then it's clearly being used not as an oven, but as a range. So it's a stove, and then it only needs to be strong enough to be able to hold the heat to fry an egg in order to be considered complete. If it's got only 1 hole on top, so then it actually is containing a lot more heat now, believe it or not. And now it could be used in 2 ways. Either it could be used as a range to put your pot on top of the hole, or it could be used to actually put food into the box. So So then it depends on the person's intention, which is what the Rambam proceeds to say. If it was made for baking, then the measure is the same as that of an oven, enough to cook a donut. If it was made for cooking, the measure is the same of a stove, which is enough to fry a mixed egg. Now, when one has begun building an oven, so you're actually building on it, you're making it bigger and bigger. If it is large, once one has begun building it for 4 handbreadths and heats it up, it is susceptible to impurity. So if you're planning a big oven, and you might continue to make it larger and larger, but you plan on using it along the way as well. So once it has 4 handbreadths, which we said a handbreadth is about 8 centimeters, 8, 16, 24, 32. Once it has about 30 centimeters height, then it is now susceptible to impurity. If you've already heated it up, you've put it through the kiln. If it is small oven, you're planning on having a mini oven, so it doesn't need to be 30 centimeters high. It could even be 1 handbreadth, about 8 centimeters high, if it's a mini oven, and it is already able to be susceptible to impurity once it's been heated up. A range with 2 openings, so now you're talking about a stove, becomes susceptible to impurity once one has begun building it 3 finger breadths and heats it. Even if it's just 3 finger breadths high, we're talking about literally a few centimeters, maybe 5 centimeters or so. So that's already enough to put something inside of it to heat it up. You're not going to be putting food inside, so you don't need to have space for food. You just need a bit of fuel to go inside there. That's enough to put in a few coals, and so it is susceptible to impurity once it's heated. With regards to a range with 1 opening, so it goes back to intention. If it was made for baking, then the measure is the same as that of an oven. And if it was made for cooking, then the measure is the same of that of a stove, which we said is about 3 fingers wide, 3 finger widths high. Now, if the oven was heated from behind, or it was heated in the shop of the craftsman before it's at its final destination, or heated unintentionally, since it was nevertheless heated, it is susceptible to impurity. So whether it entered into that kiln in its final location or intentionally or not, it is now able to be susceptible to impurity. It is susceptible to impurity. In fact, an incident occurred that happened once, that a fire broke out in an oven in a village. The incident was brought before the court for a ruling, and they determined that it is susceptible to impurity, even though it was a fire that went loose. That still was able to heat it to the required amount to make it susceptible. Now, when an oven was heated to roast food in it, it is susceptible to impurity because that's already well heated. When it was heated to whiten bundles of flax, that does not make it an oven. It remains pure because he is not doing work that affects the substance of the oven. Just being able to whiten flax is not an oven job. That's some other job. Halacha number 5, when an oven was divided into half and one of its portions was heated and then contracted impurity from liquids, that portion is impure. So if you've got actually like a 2 oven, which is with a wall down the middle, maybe one's for milk, one's for meat, and the one side was heated, so that side is ready, so that's susceptible, that's impure, but the other portion remains pure. If it contracted impurity from the carcass of a crawling animal, which is a severe source of impurity, or other similar impurities of scriptural origin, then everything is impure. The thickness of the partition separating them is impure as well. If they were both heated, and only one portion contracted impurity from liquids in its inner space, then we divide the thickness of the in-between wall. That which is used by the impure portion is impure. That which is used by the pure portion is pure. When does the above apply? When it was divided and then heated. If, however, it was first heated, been made ready, and then you decided to subdivide, If only one of them became impure, even only due to liquids, everything becomes impure. You may have put up a partition in between, but after all, it's one oven. And therefore, it all becomes impure. An oven or a range made from stone, if it wasn't made out of clay, but rather it was made out of stone, that will always be pure. A metal oven would be pure with regards to the laws of an oven. It wouldn't be impure under the terms of an oven or a range, but it could still be impure in other ways. This is derived from what the Torah says, that an impure oven must be smashed, meaning these laws apply to an entity that can be smashed. A metal oven or range is, however, susceptible to the purity of metal. So as we've learned, there are different laws governing metal utensils and wooden utensils and glass utensils, and then a special set of laws specifically for ovens. So the laws of ovens do not apply to metal ovens. What is implied? Such ovens and ranges do not contract impurity due to the presence of a source of impurity within their inner space. As we know, only earthenware vessels can contract impurity from their inner space. But if it's a metal utensil, if it wasn't touched, but there was just impurity in its inner space, it remains pure. Nor do they contract impurity when attached to the ground, as an earthenware oven or range does. So I actually made a mistake at the beginning of this shiur. I said that unless the oven was attached to the ground, I guess I didn't. I said if it was built into the walls. But if it was attached to the ground, it still is susceptible to impurity as long as it's an oven or an earthenware oven, as opposed to if it's a metal oven, once it's been nailed into the ground, it's now considered immobile and does not contract impurity. And if a source of impurity touches them even from the outside, they do contract impurity like all other metal. It's only earthenware that we say do not contract impurity from the outside. It is only earthenware that only contracts impurity from the inside. But since this is made out of metal, it can contract impurity from the outside. If they contract impurity from a human corpse, they become a primary source of impurity, and they can regain purity after contracting other types of impurity through immersion in a mikveh. As we know, an earthenware vessel cannot regain purity unless it's shattered. Not so a metal oven, it's not earthenware, and it can regain purity. Halacha number 7. When a metal oven was perforated, blemished, or cracked, and he patched it with clay. So now it's made out of multi-materials. It's got metal, but it's also got clay earthenware patches. Or it made it a coating of, or an upper surface of clay. It does contract impurity as an earthenware oven does, because at this point it is partially earthenware. How large must the hole be for the above law to apply? Large enough for fire to emerge through it, which is obviously pretty small. Similar concepts apply with regards to a metal range. If pot rests of clay are made for it, it contracts impurity as an earthenware range does. If one smears clay on a metal range, whether inside or outside, it's still not susceptible to impurity. So just smearing clay would not do it, but if you've got any significant substance of clay, that would make it now go under the laws of a clay oven and not just a metal utensil. Although an earthenware oven is not fixed to the ground, even if it is hanging from the neck of a camel, it is susceptible to ritual impurity as an earthenware oven, as implied by the verse. They are impure in any place they're located. So the impurity of an oven is pretty strict, not only if it is attached to the ground, but even if it is on a drone or camel's neck. A furnace used by smelters of metal that has a place where a pot can be placed contracts impurity as a range does. Even though it's being used by the blacksmith, it still has an oven within it, or it has a stove within it. Similarly, if a range used by glass makers has a place where a pot can be placed, it does contract impurity as a stove would. A furnace used to produce lime, glass, or pottery is pure. It's just a furnace. An oven with an opening at its side, if it has a border at its side, is susceptible to impurity, because now it has been made into a form of an oven. Halacha number 11. The following laws apply when stones were joined to each other and formed into an oven. So you've basically piled up stones one on top of the other until you've made a formation that can be used as an oven. So in this little picture over here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. He has over here 3 pieces of stone, and you're now leading them all towards each other. And the end result is that you have a little oven over there that you could cook up some, whatever it is that you're cooking, baking. If one made a coating for it on the inside and on the outside, so if you've now coated, because we said stones are never susceptible to impurity, but if these stones were coated with clay, then it is considered as an oven in all contexts and contracts impurity to the presence of the source of impurity within its space. If it was only coated from the outside, then it contracts impurity from contact with the source of impurity, but not from the presence of source of impurity in its inner space. It's not yet fully considered like an oven until it's coated on both sides, or until it's coated on the inside. Because I guess if it's just coated on the outside, then there isn't clay on the inside, so therefore it doesn't contract from the inside. If stones were connected to an oven, but were not connected to each other, then they contract impurity together with the oven. Although they're not connected to each other, they are connected to the oven. If they were connected with each other, but were not connected to the oven, then they are like what's called a tira. What's the law of a tira? So it's a little place that's built, surrounded by walls, into which they would put bread after they took it out of the oven. It's called a tira because it's like a little courtyard. It's like a little mini room where the bread would be kept. We'll see more about a tira in a moment. If one dug into the earth and fashioned a tira of earth, it is pure. And a tira of a range is pure. The image he has over here of these halachas are firstly, see that he has a little space dug into the side of the oven where he puts his ready-made bread to stay warm. Kind of equivalent like that bottom warmer drawer that you have in oven units today. It's a little space next to the oven where the bread stays warm. So that is pure. It's not considered as part of the oven, even if it was built into the oven, as in this image over here on the side. And 2 barrels and 2 frying pans are combined to make a range. They contract impurity from the presence of a source of impurity within its inner space and from contact with a source of impurity. So both from its airspace and from touch. Let's see a picture of that. We've got 2 barrels at the bottom, and then we've got a pot on the top, and that has formed an oven. The inner space of the barrel of the actual barrel itself, though, remains pure. The thickness of the walls of the barrels is divided. That which serves the range is susceptible to impurity, and that which serves the inside of the barrel remains pure. Next scenario, we're getting very creative over here. When a person affixes 3 earthenware stands of a trivet in the earth and connects them with clay, so that one can place a pot on them, they are susceptible to impurity like arranged. So what's the first scenario? 3 earthenware stands of a trivet. So that would be stands of a trivet. That would be this over here. That's image number 1. We've got 3 things on the ground that have been put together with clay, on which the pot stands. This is scenario number 2 we're going to speak about in a moment, when it's placed on top of nails. This is scenario number 3 when it's placed on top of stone. Can you see what I'm showing?
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's 3 stands of a trivet, then they do constitute a range and become impure. If it was 3 pegs on the earth, even though he used clay to make a place on which the pot could sit, because the pegs were thin, so you made a bit of a surface on top of the pegs, they're pure, like a metal range. that little bit of clay on top of the nail is not significant in this regard. Similarly, stones that were not coated with clay on which one places a pot are not susceptible to impurity. It's just like a stone range, an oven made of stone. When a person makes two stones into a range and connects them with clay, they are susceptible to impurity. If you connect one with clay, but you do not connect the other with clay, it does not contract impurity. Here are our two images. So we have on the one, in this image, only one of them is connected to the ground with clay, so it's not susceptible to impurity. Over here, we have both of them connected to the ground with clay, and it is susceptible to impurity. Halacha number 15, when a person rests the pot on a stone and on an oven. So you're now balancing the pot between the stone and the oven. On it and on a range with an opening for one pot. Or it and on a range with an opening for two pots. In all scenarios, it is susceptible to impurity. On it and on a wall or on it and on a rock, it is not susceptible to impurity. Because if it's between a stone, right, a wall, what do they say? Between a rock and a hard place. If it's between a stone and a wall, so there's nothing there to make it susceptible to impurity. But if it's between a stone and an oven or a stove, so then it is impure in virtue of the oven or stove. Just to see the examples over here. Here we got it, if you could see so well. See there, you've got your oven, and then between it and a stone, you have the pot, or between a wall and a stone, or between a mountain and a stone. So when it's with a oven, then it's susceptible to impurity. But a person, next, halacha number 16. With regards to a range made by a cook, in which instance one stone is placed at the side of another stone, and then another is placed at its side in a continuous chain, and they are all connected with clay. Sounds like some kind of old-style industrial oven. If one of them contacts impurity, they all do not contract impurity. You go one by one. So let's just see a picture of that. Here we go. We've got a lineup of stones, one next to the other, with place to put coal in between each of them. So only the one that becomes impure is impure. And now it's going to get more fun. Ready? The impurity is going to jump around. See if you could catch them. The following rules apply when there are three stones that were connected with clay and were made into two ranges, like the picture I just showed you. Whether they were connected to each other and not connected to the ground, or connected to the ground and not connected to each other, the following applies. If one of the two ranges contract impurity, the portion of the middle stone which serves the impure range contracts impurity. The portion which serves the pure range, by contrast, remains pure. So let's just look at this over here. We have our three stones, and as you see, there's gray in that middle stone. The portion of that stone that serves the right or the left will follow the status of the right or the left. But if one removes the outer stone of the pure range, the middle stone has been definitely classified and is impure in its entirety. If the outer stone of the impure range is removed, the middle stone is purified in its entirety. So let me spell that out. So in this image over here, if impurity was on this side, so then half of the stone becomes impure. But if impurity was on this side, and then you removed that stone, so then this whole stone is now only serving this side, so then the whole stone becomes impure. Conversely, if the impurity was on that side, and you removed that stone, so then now the source of impurity is gone, so then this whole middle stone becomes pure. The following rules apply if both ranges contracted impurity. So then, if the middle stone is large, so then one allocates a portion large enough for a pot to be placed down on it on one side for one range, and a portion large enough for a pot to be placed down on it on the other side for the other range, but the remainder of the stone is pure. So if it's a very large stone, you could actually just have portions of the stone. But if it's a small stone, then everything contracts impurity because half of it is serving the one impure oven and half of it is serving the other impure oven. If the middle stone was removed, so now you had your three-stone solution, and now that middle stone is now taken out. Can you still use it? You can't. It's too wide now. So different laws apply. If a large part can be placed down on the two outer ones, if it's not too wide, then it's still impure. You haven't done anything to it. It's still functional. But if they are further apart, the range is pure. It's defunctional. It's no longer a range. What happens if one returned the middle stone? Then everything is pure as it was. Once it became pure because it was no longer a range, so now it's like you're building a brand new range because the last range was ice range. It was no longer a range. So now it's a new range and it's pure. If one coated it with clay, it is susceptible to ritual impurity in the future. It's all brand new. It's going forward. Provided one heats each of them sufficiently to cook an egg, they will need to be reheated to the significant measure. The last two halachas, 18 and 19. When two stones were made into a range and contracted impurity, and then one added one stone to the stone on one side and another stone to the stone on the other side. Half of each of the two stones from the first range is impure and half is pure. If the two pure stones that were added were later removed, the two stones of the first range returned to the initial impurity. So this is reverse of what we learned earlier. So here, this picture of 4 stones over here. So you started off with just 2. Started off with just that and that. And they became impure. Then you added another 2 ovens on this side and this side. You now got 4 stones. The moment you add those other 2 stones, then the 2 middle stones now get divided. The half that's closer to the outside is pure, and the half that's closer to the inside is impure. If you subsequently remove the 2 stones, and now you're just left with 2 of the 4, then those 2 stones are now entirely impure because now they're only serving the middle range, which is impure. They're no longer serving pure ranges because they're gone. Finally, halacha number 19, an earthenware heating counter that has receptacles in which a mixture of ash and coals were placed and which were used for pots is pure with regards to the laws pertaining to a range, but it is susceptible to impurity as a kli with the receptacle. So this unique type of heating counter does not have the status of an oven, but rather just of an earthenware vessel. Therefore, if it was attached to the ground, it will be pure, because we said only an oven, even when attached to the ground, remains impure. But since this is no longer being called an oven, it's just being called an earthenware vessel, once it's attached to the ground, it is no longer susceptible, it is pure. As are other vessels. And if it has a hole, it's not susceptible to impurity at all, because now it's holy, it's got a hole, it's no longer intact. Now, that would not be the case with an oven. Final 2 points. An entity that touches the sides of the counter does not contract impurity like one which touches a range. So we said another unique law about a range is anything that touches its side becomes impure. But in this instance, it's not considered a range, this heating counter, and therefore if it's touched from the side, they're pure. Its wide portion where one can sit while the food is cooking contracts impurity if the counter contracts impurity. So that wide part is considered as a part of it. So can we get a picture of this last halacha? Here it is. You've got, it's a whole structure. It's not just an oven. And here it's actually something sitting on a basket. We'll get there in a moment. Simply, if I turned over a basket and built a range on top of the basket, it contracts impurity according to the laws pertaining to a wooden kli, because it's based on the basket, and not according to those applying to a range. Therefore, it does not contract impurity from the presence of source impurity in its inner space. Wow, these are far from common or simple halachas.